So I know Coach Simmons he's from Navarre High School, and that's not too far from where I live here in Crestview, Florida. We graduated the same year, 2003. So I've known of him through the paper, but then we actually went to Delta State University in the same year as freshmen. So I've known him from there. Offensive lineman, actually, we wrestled one day. I don't know if he remembers, but we wrestled once um, in the hallway. You know how it is.
Freshman dorms.
In college, yep. Whittington Williams. Those were some days, man. Some good times. But
Yeah.
John's been all over, from high school to college to private sector as well. So I know he's going to do some stuff. He's big on some strongman training stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead. I was actually at Navarre High School last night. We actually had at the Navarre Invitational girls weightlifting meet there. So I was
How'd y'all do?
So went pretty well. We got some PRs. Not quite as strong as Navarre yet. They got some girls that will throwing up some weight up there. So I mean, it was a lot of invitational records were broken yesterday, but it was a good event. So, but I'm gonna go ahead and let John get started with his presentation.
Okay, awesome. Appreciate it there, Coach. Okay, let me share the screen real quick. Is that working? Okay, so when Coach Ramos asked me, what would you like to present on, or is there anything that you could present on? One of the things that I think I add into the program that's just a little bit different, and mostly it's kind of probably maybe because of my background into off-season training, is some strongman methods and events and other things that we do. By the way, my name is John Simmons. I'm the Director of Strength Conditioning at Marion School District in Marion, Arkansas, right across the river from Memphis, Tennessee. And when we ask why strongman, and how this plays into my background, okay, the origins of strongman date back over 100 years. When you think about the beginning of a lot of physical training and physical culture in general, these four people, this would be like your Mount Rushmore of strongman, right? And bodybuilding, and they were all tied in together. But at the top, you have Eugene Sandow. On the right, you have Louis Cyr. In the bottom middle, you have Arthur Saxon. In the bottom left, you have Apollon. Louis Uni, he's French, but known by Apollon. And these guys would travel in circuses or sideshows, or even hold their own events when they got big enough, and basically just to express their feats of strength. Now you're looking at these guys and you're seeing these physiques, and some of the feats of strength that they did over 100 years ago still haven't even been matched. And you're wondering, like, this is before the use of any enhancing substances or anything like that. It was just hard work, training, diet, sleep, all those things. So that's really where it started, and kind of the birthplace of powerlifting, modern day strongman, weightlifting. All those things kind of came from a lot of what these people were doing 120, 130 years ago. Now, modern strongman, that's basically morphed since the 70s and the 80s, Disney's Wild World of Sports, and when they were starting to be televised. Back then, it was a lot of your best athletes from wrestling, bodybuilding, powerlifting, all those things, because it was a fairly new competition. And that's morphed. Back then, it was a lot of people just didn't know what the events were, or they were very obscure. And nowadays, everything is a lot more technical. It's a lot more fine-tuned. You're using calibrated plates, all those kinds of things. That way, the stones are actually calibrated and made a certain way that these athletes can specifically know exactly how much they're using. Back in the day, they didn't know what they were lifting until they came to the competitions. Nowadays, obviously, they know fairly well in advance, usually a couple months, so that they can specifically train for those events. But how did I get started in strongman, and where does my influence come from? Like Coach said, I'm from the Panhandle of Florida. Started off playing football in high school, also was on the weightlifting team and track and field. That got me into college, played football in college, played arena football as well. And after that, I immediately started coaching once I decided to hang up the cleats. And the first sport, and kind of one of my mentors, he was really into weightlifting. And I had a little bit of a weightlifting background in high school as well. So that's where I first competed. That was my first chance to really do any kind of individual sport outside of football since high school. And one of the people I worked with while I was at Ole Miss, that's when I first started coaching. I got into the private sector for a little bit, and then I started taking a low paid position at Ole Miss. One of the guys I started working with actually competed in strongman, and he was the one that kind of put that bug in my ear. I'd always grown up watching it, as a lot of us have over Christmas break and everything when the reruns are being played. But I really started to get interested in it myself. Wasn't until years later when I actually started coaching high school that I had a little bit more time where I could do those kind of competitions on the side. And I've done, I think, 5 strongman competitions, local meets, and I qualified for my first national meet down in Dallas, USS Nationals down in this June. And looking forward to that, and started to kind of train and get ready for that. But so that's a little bit of my background and kind of how I came from, sports background into weightlifting is strongman. Now, a couple of the reasons, for strongman and why we would train it, the benefits of it. It's different than traditional strength training. It's not, just a barbell or dumbbells. We can definitely use those implements, but it's not your typical squat, bench, deadlift, press, whichever. You can do so many things. And for athletes, I feel like it breaks up a little bit of that monotony with that training. Our kids are I'm sure everybody's kids are this way, but our kids are hard pressed to focus in some of the things they do. So we're going to teach. We're still going to do all those basic barbell movements. We're still going to do the Olympic variations and clean snatches, jerks, all those. We're going to do plyos. We're going to do med balls and all this. But this just adds another element or that can complement. Okay. A lot of the movement patterns are very similar between strongman events and the Olympic movements or jumping, throwing, all those kinds of things. And they're even tied in certain ways into strongman. Obviously total body compound movements, and it adds that level of free play back into training. We know that especially with social media and just the way our culture and our society is nowadays, a lot of our athletes and young people are not getting outside. They're not doing the riding the bikes, the climbing the trees, and running around, jumping. They're not doing those things anymore. So this adds just a little component of that. And I think because it's different, they tend to enjoy it a little bit more than a bar sitting on their back sometimes. And then there's other things you can incorporate. It doesn't just have to be the one event. You can make it a competition, or you can make challenges. Who can, complete this lift with this weight or anything like that. So it adds a little bit more to the training, I think. Okay. Now, what are the traditional events when you break it down to a strongman competition? Okay. Typically 5 or 6 events, and it could be one of each of these or a combination or multiple events. So typically you're going to have an overhead event, a loading event, a deadlift event, a carrying event, and some kind of grip or push-pull, sled, truck pull, something of that nature in a just average strongman competition. So when we talk about the carries, typically the first thing that everybody thinks about is a farmer's carry or suitcase carry. I was really introduced to these before I even started strongman by Coach Dan John, and his advocacy towards carries and all the benefits from just development of the shoulders, the trap, the neck, just the grip, the total body aspect of moving with weight. But it doesn't have to be just your farmer's carries. It could be an odd object like a stone or a sandbag or a med ball, or even a Zercher carry where you hold a barbell or something just across the top of your arms. So many different ways that you can incorporate it. And some of the basic implements that we use: barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells, strap bars, and farmer's handles. Those are the most common things that you're going to find at any training facility that anyone is at. Sandbags, there's so many different types of sandbags now. There's the ones that you can fill that have a zipper, Velcro. You can throw trash bag liners into another one that you kind of cinch at the top. Med balls or stones, and almost, like I said, almost any odd object that you can think of. That's also the beauty of Strongman, is that your imagination when it comes to a lot of the implements is the only limiting factor. There are so many. There was a competition last year that I thought I was going to do. I actually bought a fire hydrant off of Facebook Marketplace, which is kind of funny. It weighs 200 pounds and it needs a lot of work to clean it up and everything, so it doesn't, the rust or anything like that. Obviously, that kind of odd object I wouldn't want my athletes to use, but just putting that point out there, there's literally anything that you could kind of come up with and think when it comes to carrying objects. How do we program these into a workout or a training session? The first thing you can do, and it's just like almost any loading protocol, is you can increase the time. If I'm carrying it for, 15 seconds or up to a minute or even longer, trying to hold that, build that endurance and even that conditioning aspect. Pick up a heavy object, carry it for, like I said, a minute, and tell me when you drop that you're not breathing heavy and, it doesn't have some form of aerobic capacity conditioning aspect to it, right? You can increase the distance. Typically with a lot of my things, our weight room is essentially, we have a turf space in it that's 30 by 30 yards, close to that. So a lot of times when I call the distances that we're going to train and what we're going to use, I'll say down or down and back or side to side of the weight room, just depending on who else is using it, because a lot of times we'll have multiple teams in there. You can increase the intensity, obviously, by adding a heavier weight. Always err on the lighter side and work up to it. There's a specific way that I like my athletes to carry the implements. I'll kind of show that in a video here later, and in just a minute, actually. And it's not always about picking up the heaviest weight. I want to make sure that they can do it just like everything else, with proper posture, alignment, and under control. If those things are not met, then we drop the weight. I'll sacrifice, heavier implements and heavier weights, making sure that we do it correctly in a certain way. You can also decrease the rest periods and increase the volume, add more sets or more distance to it as you go. Okay, so in this first video, a couple of our alumni have been back this past week, and that still haven't left for going back to the winter spring semester of college. So I had them come in a little bit, and so I don't know if the volume will play, but so the first video, we just got kettlebells, told them to go pick a random set. Now, when I want our athletes to do a farmer's carry or a suitcase carry, it's the second video, tall posture, shoulders back retracted, and I want them to actually bend their elbows a little bit. A couple of our guys go excessive with this, but the reason for that is I want to make sure that they are in control of the weight and they are not just hanging on to the weight, that obviously showing that it is within their strength ability and it is not pulling them down or forward, and that their eyes are straight ahead, all those things. So we'll go ahead and play this one. So you can kind of see the elbows are kind of excessive on the first two guys. The one in the middle, he's a alum that hasn't come back before. So he didn't have quite that elbow bend. He hasn't done these before, but that would be just your typical farmer's walk. You can add, like I said, kettlebells, dumbbells. You can use barbells if you don't have heavy enough kettlebells or dumbbells, which is if you have the equipment available. This next one is a suitcase carry. this adds a whole nother implement or component of it, because that unilateral balance and control, you're going to want to actually lean away from the dumbbell or the kettlebell.
Try to lean into the weight. Don't lean away from it. Bend that elbow, Tom. Bend that.
So that's a cue that'll actually say lean into the weight, because naturally, if they lean into it, they're going to actually dip towards it. So same thing. A lot of times it'll be one arm down, one arm back, or down and back, then switch, making sure that they keep the implement in their hands at all times. And then the last video is one of our, he's a sophomore right now, with one of our Atlas med balls that we got from XD TRX, and just showing that, once again, odd object carries as well.
There you go. Squeeze it. You walk faster than that.
And once again, we can incorporate these in multiple sets, or you can get them in groups, down and back, next man, next woman, go back and forth. I incorporate this strongman training with just about all of our sports here in Marion. And I deal with every athlete that we have from 7th grade all the way up through 12th. So very diverse range of athletes, female, male, sports, all those things. And we'll incorporate some level, not necessarily the highest levels or the heaviest implements, whatever, with every sport, but we're going to incorporate something in that, especially in the early off season. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the next event that we kind of go to is loading, or an implement over a shoulder or a flip. Now, just looking at the very first picture that we're looking at, loading an Atlas stone onto a platform. Once again, the strongman movements can elicit the similar patterns of the Olympic movements, or jumps or throws, the extension of the hips, knees, and the flexion of the ankles, which that we know is where your power and a lot of your strength and power output come from, right? So no different. And this is just one ways that we can do it. In the bottom left, they've actually started incorporating more of the strongman events into CrossFit, which I think is a great idea, because it's going to just bring more knowledge and awareness to the sport in itself, but bring more athletes to it as well. But it's not just for the, your offensive linemen, or for your, your bigger athletes. It's for all athletes that, can utilize those things. And the XD med ball I was talking about is this one right here. The we got 60s, 80s, 100s, 125s, and 150s. So thankfully, I have that ability to get that kind of equipment, and I've been able to use it a lot, especially, like I said, in our off-season programs. Now, your typical implements that you're going to use: sandbags, med balls, tractor tires, all those things to kind of mimic the loading or the over shoulder component of this. How do you program this? Technique first. Just like you would do any Olympic lift, just like you would do any squat, bench press, anything, because it is highly technical and it happens in a very quick action, short amount of time. We want to make sure that we're putting them in the right position to not only do it correctly, but do it safely. Okay. And a lot of the loading protocols are very similar to Olympic lifts. So your low volume, 2 to 5 reps of 2 to 5 sets, rest periods in between, at the minimum 60 seconds, typically in between 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes would be more ideal. Loading height. So when we're loading to a platform or a bar, bottom left picture, you can show that yoke where he's actually loading it over the bar. A lot of times in competition, you'll either load it and somebody will return it back, or they'll have 2 people and they'll just be passing it back and forth. So you can add, kind of a level of competition there. But loading height from 42 to 60 inches, And that 60 inches is going to be for your obviously taller athletes. You don't want to have them where they're actually trying to press the weight up over their head. It's just not worth it, in my opinion, where they can still extend and place the stone or the sandbag or whichever implement on top of the platform. And then if it's too heavy for an athlete, so the tire in particular, especially when we're dealing with some of our soccer athletes or some of our our tennis and those type athletes, I'll have them pair up and they'll work together. And I think that adds an interesting component too, where they have a little teamwork involved in that as well. So now that we're talking about our, our extension movements, right here's the alumni. They're doing the tire flips.
Don't step back. Keep going through it. Keep pushing through it. Next two up, next two up, next two up. Drive the hips. Up and through. There you go. One more. Good.
So teaching the tire flip, once again, technique first. One of the very first things that we have to teach the athletes is to actually probably back away from the tire a little bit. Normally you're thinking scoot up as close to it as I can so that I can pick it up and use my legs, not my back. Well, the tire isn't a normal implement. It's not a deadlift. It's not anything like that. It pivots from a point that's a lot further, typically 3 plus 5 feet from where your toes are in the beginning. So we actually want to lean forward and push the tire out. You tell me, get the hips through, push forward, don't lift up, and then try to flip it, push out, and then flip it all in one motion. So that's one of the biggest cues that whenever we're doing tire flips, because there are so many other variables that come with it, making sure that they're pushing in the direction of the tire and not lifting up and then trying to get under it and flip it. Now, when it gets heavier, that's going to be a little bit more difficult of an action, but trying to get a tire, the best thing about tires is if you have a truck or if you know somebody who has a truck, you can get any of them for just about free. If you go to a any kind of tire repair store or sometimes a dealership, or we're in the Arkansas Delta, so we have a John Deere in town. They have a a load of extra tires that they can't use, whether they were punctured, whatever, they can't repair. And one of the guys that works there is an alum from our high school, and so he delivered a couple of them over to us. They're not in this; they're a little bit bigger, but you can get those for free. Those don't cost. Basically, it's do you have the storage space? And obviously, if you leave them outside, they collect debris and water and stuff when it rains and through storms and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that or bugs, anything like that. You want to make sure before you use them, you kind of clean them out. And then the next video, one of our athletes, he's a junior offensive lineman working the stone over shoulder.
One more time. Other side.
I think that's the 100-pound med ball. So once again, making sure that you're standing over, I'm gonna play that one more time, standing over the med ball, not out in front. We want this one to be a little bit close, brings it in tight, extends the hips, throws it, and finishes over the shoulder. Lineman back there being very athletic, is being very good. It's awesome. Those two guys are gonna be special. The one in the blue shirt, who I'm about to play the video, he's a sophomore, and the other one's a junior. So I still got a couple more years with those guys. I'm excited about that. But anytime we're thinking about a stone or a sandbag, highly transferable to football or any other grappling, wrestling, rugby, any other of those kinds of sports, because you're actually having to work on, your hands, your forearms, everything squeezing in. That's one of the biggest reasons why I utilize this for our football athletes. And then this is Carrie is doing a stone to shoulder or stone load, excuse me.
Now squat down a little bit lower to pick it up. There you go. Hips. Good. More. Hips.
And so this is Carius's first off season with us. He was with us last year, but he wasn't with us in the off season. And one of the cues that I think that he would that we work on more when we get more practice with this is actually bringing the stone in. You don't want to necessarily have it hanging there. Just puts a lot of extra stress on the arms, but bringing it into your body and loading it from there. So it's as close to your body as possible. With the stones, a rounded back is not necessarily a bad thing. It's almost how you have to pick it up. But when you bring the stone in and you squeeze and you brace it to your body, it makes everything together in one piece. It's not hanging, from your appendages, so say a deadlift where, everything's rolling forward. And typically when you're lifting the heavier stones, your low back is still in that neutral position. And that's what's the most important when lifting anything, is making sure your low back stays in that neutral spine position. There's a couple other things that, when it comes to grip work that we want to incorporate, not necessarily just a strongman, but there's a lot of implements and a lot of events they do specifically that incorporates grip work, whether it be the thicker handles and bars, ropes, or just holding implements for a longer period of time. So one thing that we do is we actually do have some of these Apollon axles. They're 2-inch diameter bars. We bought a bunch of the fat grips attachments that you can get put on bars to add that extra grip. And then we also have battle ropes that we use for a lot of our pulling and sled work, and then hold. So whether it be holding the edges of the dumbbells, holding, dumbbells for time, kettlebells for time. I actually incorporated when I first got to Marion 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, we bought a brand new weight room, and I made sure that all the pull-up attachments were the bigger 2-inch diameter bars. I will sacrifice a couple extra reps on pull-ups, chin-ups, whichever, for that extra grip work. So I think it's that important. So I incorporate it in a lot of the carries. We'll add fat grips to the dumbbells and carry those as farmers walks, all those kinds of things as well. So one component that's not necessarily specifically attributed to strongman, but it is one of the biggest events, is overhead training. Most of us do this already, whether it's presses, push presses, power jerks, split jerks, barbell, dumbbells, whichever. Highly transferable. And if you don't do a whole lot of overhead pressing, I would highly suggest it, just because the more we know, the more we train our athletes on our feet, the more that it transfers to the court or to the field. So it's funny, I have one of my strongman logs. It's a 12-inch log that I have, and I keep it at the school. And every once in a while, one of the athletes asks if they can pick it up, and it's always fun to kind of coach them through and watch them do it. It's not typically, it's not even close to being like a regular bar, and they try to treat it like a regular bar. But it just goes to show, adding that extra diameter of the bar, adding that extra implement changes the movement almost completely, or how you execute it, and that you're going to build a lot of strength in other ways that you wouldn't normally with just a regular barbell or just regular dumbbells. So medleys for conditioning. So now we talked about, the specific different events and implements that we like to use. Well, sometimes at the end of the workout, we'll incorporate multiple things back to back to back to back, not only for the conditioning aspect, but it helps us get a lot of different things in a short period of time. So you can, like, we got Cameron here. He's one of our alumni. He's going to do a sled pull to a push, and you can make it into a competition as well. I try to make sure competitions are nothing that I don't add a whole lot of farmers carries, I'd say, into the competitions, because I don't want athletes necessarily running with the weights to where they could come out of balance or drop the weights, land on the weights, drop the weights on them. So it's being smart about what you pair up together and how you do that. But this is Cameron doing just a sled pull to push.
Right.
So now, how does all of this fit into our program, and how do I implement it off of our, our daily routine, especially in the early off season and the off season? There's three ways that we do it. One, we add these components within the workout. So, and I'll show you examples of that, an example of that here in a minute. And the other one was we put it towards the end of the workout in more of the conditioning or circuit type deal. And the third way that we incorporate it is on a completely separate day. So with some of our teams, Fridays are a little bit shorter. Our athletic period is at the end of the day. So we have 8 class periods. Varsity athletics is that 8th period. And a lot of times our coaches, if we are in the off season, they'll give them, like, they want them out at the end of the bell, which is usually a 50-minute class period. So we get about transitions, everything's really close by. So about 45 to 40 minutes of work. So we will have a day where our Fridays where it'll be just strongman or a medley conditioning type event there as well. So within our training, so this is an example. This was volleyball. Our deadlift, where we do 3 reps and then we actually carry it 20 yards. It's a 20-yard down, 20-yard or 10 yards down, turn around, 10 yards back in the weight room. So that would be where we're still trying to get the strength work in and build it in. That's a smaller weight room. It's a separate weight room. We have five on campus. And so that one doesn't have as much space as the field house does. So that when we do those trap deadlifts, we have to, turn around quickly, come back. But that's one way that we incorporate it within the workout. You can do, typically it's going to be carries, overhead carries, trap bar, farmers, dumbbells, what have you. Now, when we incorporate it towards the end of the training, okay, this is our football off season in our cycle right now currently. You'll see we have an upper lower split on our Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And then towards the end, you can kind of see down there, we'll do farmers carries right now on Mondays, suitcase carries on Thursdays. And then we'll add some kind of battle rope slams or push-ups with it, bear crawls, inverted rows. And then on our lower body days, we're going to incorporate sled drags, where it's a forward sled drag, the weight's behind us and we're pulling it forward, or and stone loads to boxes, and backward sled drags and stone loads over shoulders on the Friday. Now, the way that our workouts are split up, we have 109 guys right now in our football off season. That's the biggest number we've had since I've been there. And we expect a lot of those guys are guys that are trying to come back or have never played before. So we expect that number to kind of wind down. But the way we make this work is we split up our groups. So we have the bigs lift first, and then bigs and our track guys lift first. And then our skill guys, the rest of our skill guys come in and we flip them, whether they might be in doing football meetings or they might be doing other things. But that's how we kind of bring the numbers down a little bit more when we're doing this to make sure it's optimal. And we keep it, once again, I keep it very simple with a lot of these guys, especially the new guys that haven't done this before. The implements are going to be, the weights are going to be extremely light, just working on how to pick up the farmer's carry properly, how to hold that posture And same thing with the suitcase carry and the drags. With the drags, we'll do forward drags where we have some handles and straps that are attached to the prowler sleds. Lean forward, we'll load those up heavier and we'll march forward. Typically, because they're heavier, we don't go for very long distances. Maybe 20 yards is probably our go-to, 10 to 20 yards on those. And then on like our Friday, our backwards carries or backwards sled drags, a little bit lighter, but for those will be a little bit longer distance. So those will be 20 to 40 yards typically when we implement those. Now, this is just an example. So one thing that we added this year is I said 8th period is our varsity athletics, but we used to have 7th at our junior high was built in during the day. But we switched that and we changed it to where 7th and 8th period or 8th grade football were at the end of the day as well. Makes it very difficult. We actually built another weight room, which helps us out tremendously. And a lot of the times we'll have varsity in the weight room, 7th or 8th grade on the turf space, and then our 7th or 8th grade on the other weight room. And we kind of flip it. So you can see here where, Tuesdays will be sled pushes forward for a couple weeks. Then we do sled drags forward. Then we do the backward sled drags. Wednesdays, we do alternating weeks because we'll have one group there and then they flip. We'll go farmers carries or suitcase carries, and then as well as our sprint work. And yes, so those are typically with the young ones. Try to keep it simple. Now they are also in that 8th period, like I said, which is much more difficult for them because you're talking about 7th grade to 9th grade for us, our junior high. They have to get on the bus. With the high school athletes, you can keep them after the bell, once school's over, because we're expecting, them to, most of them can drive themselves or get rides, or, if their parents come pick them up, it's okay if they stay a little bit later. A lot of our younger athletes, and especially our school district, like I said, we're in the Delta. So our town is a pretty decent sized town, but we also pull from other places in our county that's 20, 30 minutes away. So a lot of those buses have a long trek. So we got to make sure that they're obviously getting on those buses. So their training schedule a little bit shorter so that they can dress in, change, dress out afterwards and get to the bus on time. So it's a lot of open-ended sets. It's basically, we'll do sleds 20 yards with planks in between. And it's just, let's try to get as many working sets in that day. That's our main focus. That way they can get back to the buses and get ready to leave. So for our 7th and 8th grade, that's how we do those. The nice thing about the other junior high sports that I have for football, basketball, and volleyball, those are our other school-sponsored junior high sports. Their period, because they don't have to worry about that, is a little bit longer and it's closer to the classrooms. It's not a separate weight room attached to a different building. So I get a little bit more time with them and we can incorporate, like I said, the carries within the workouts or after the workouts a little bit easier. And this would be, like I said, for our Fridays where it's just specifically a strongman circuit day, whether we're doing tire flips, sled drags, hammer swings, farmers walks, and med ball stone loads. And we can do that in any different order, try to separate the explosive movements from more of the longer duration movements. So we're not getting too fatigued back to back to back on those explosive movements. And our athletes love and hate this one because it's a lot of work. But like I said, it breaks up the traditional strength training. And especially with a lot of our male athletes and a lot of our female athletes, they love to get to compete and push each other doing these different things because this is stuff that they're not used to doing or used to seeing, whether it be their favorite athletes on social media train as well. So here are a couple do-it-yourself options. Implements, Strongman implements themselves, just like any exercise equipment on the market, is extremely, extremely expensive and hard to come by. I was very, very fortunate that when I got hired and recently with our other weight room. Our school district is just us. So it's just our high school, it's just our junior high, and it's 3 K-6 magnet schools. So that allows our budget to be our superintendent. He is a very smart and very diligent man when it comes to money and fundraising and all those things and knowing where to get the money from. So he also values extracurricular activities. Said this before, we're in the Arkansas Delta, right across the river from Mississippi. There is a lot of our athletes are not affluent, very underprivileged, underserved, coming from very rough households, gang violence that kind of flows over from the river, from Memphis, and a lot of other things. So he puts a premium on our extracurricular activities. So when we need to find money for, a new weight room or getting everything we need, he very much made sure that I essentially had 2 blank checks. So I was able to buy a lot of the stuff. The med balls are very expensive, the big ones. So a lot of schools, I understand, smaller districts, smaller schools that are in multiple districts, so they don't necessarily get those funds just pushed into their school. A lot of these things have to be done, on a budget. And so the last school I was at when I first got there, they had logs, essentially just like this one in the top left, that had like hardware just screwed into it, right? Basically it was a private school, so they had about 75 acres of just woodlands around them, but they just cut up some trees that, had some issues, whatever, and just screwed into it. Now, obviously, when you're dealing with something like that, the weight isn't, you can't say that this one's the exact same weight as that. And it'd be kind of difficult, to try to cut it precisely, but doesn't matter. And you can implement this with the other weights, the dumbbells that you have, where they're offset carries, 45 pounds in one hand, 35 pounds in the other. Drop it when you get halfway, turn around, pick the weights up, come back. So that's one way to kind of battle that issue. Sandbags. Now, when you buy sandbags and you want to fill them with sand, the cheapest option, if you don't live next to the beach or, you don't have a construction site that's just got sand laying around, go to Lowe's, Home Depot, basically any kind of store, like that, warehouse that sells play sand. And typically the price is going to be about $4 to $6 for about 50 to 60 pounds of sand. Buy some duct tape and it's actually, under $12. You can easily make a 50 to 60 pound sandbag. Now you will, after a while it'll drop and it'll start to bust open and those things. So you'll have to tape back over it. But that's another very, very economical option to make these implements. There's also old military duffel bags, or even like here, the Under Armour bag. Get a couple contractor trash bags, some zip ties, some duct tape, and essentially just tape it up. Make sure, then you have, get rid of the straps on the side and you have just a traditional sandbag. You can find other things here in the middle where they just have looks like 4x8s with the hardware attached. And you can even make Atlas stones. Obviously, those are more time consuming. You have to have them cured. The molds are expensive, but once you have the mold, the bags of concrete are extremely affordable, and you can make multiple stones. You can keep making stones as much as you want. You don't have to worry about, unless the mold breaks, but you have all those options that are very simple. You can do them anywhere. And if you're dealing with a budget, these might be better options than necessarily buying them as the implement itself, priced to go. Okay. So quickly, just wanted to say thank you. I wanted to thank a couple people. I want to thank Coach John. Like he said, we've known each other directly, indirectly for over 20 years. We competed in high school against each other in weightlifting, not necessarily in the same weight class back then, but our schools would compete against each other. So I knew about him before we went together and met at Delta State and played football there for a little bit. Want to thank my coworker, Craig Mashevsky, he's the one that I told you was competing in strongman, kind of got me into it and wanting to learn a little bit more about it. And like I said, grew up watching it, and he was the first person that I ever met that actually competed in it. So I wanted to make sure that give him a shout out. My superintendent, Dr. Fenner, like I said, he's been great bringing me on board and giving me every single opportunity. Our athletes have absolutely no excuses of why we can't do the things that we want to do based off of our facilities and our equipment. And lastly, but definitely mostly, I want to thank my wife, Chastity, and my family, my son, Cash, my daughter, Kylan, for their support. It's always great when they get to come to the competitions and cheer me on. And that kind of helps make it worth it. I knew that being closer to home, and that's why I left Ole Miss and Memphis, left the college realm to get back to high school. I wanted to be around and make more of an impact, but I also wanted to be around my family a little bit more. And they help push me when it comes to my competitions and all those things and support. So I can't thank them enough for that. So any questions?
If there's no questions, then definitely appreciate it, John. I just think that, that strongman implemented the strength conditioning, source performance is definitely a unique perspective. So it's definitely, when I was putting this together, there's no doubt, it's like one of the first guys that came up to my head, because I just thought that would be a pretty good and fun presentation and creative to bring things into that we typically might not think of, or how can we relate that into our performance training. So definitely very appreciative, and love some of those do-it-yourself options, and seeing that, and just the creativity of, hey man, you got a little brain work and little money, you could put something together and make it work. You don't need to have the fanciest weight room or the fanciest stuff to get the job done. So
Absolutely. It's all about your creativity and what you can, what you want to do, and then just find ways to come up with it. There's so many options and opportunities there for it.
all right, if no one has any questions for John, then definitely appreciate it. And again, those is information. Feel free to reach out to him. I know I'm always watching his training online on his Instagram and Facebook that he posts and stuff like that. So feel free to reach out to him. Those is information. Our next speaker's not logged in yet. I'm not seeing it. I know he's set to go at 1 p.m. So what we could do, we got a couple options. I've been reaching out to him. I haven't heard back from him yet, but we could either take a little break and see if he logs in here, right before 1, or we could plug away and I could just move on with my presentation. Just let me know if you guys have a preference. Let me know. Otherwise, we'll probably just take a little break and see if he logs in here shortly.